allow us to introduce to you the ensuring ecological integrity, clean and healthy environment. When we say sustainable development, it has something to deal with the ability to meet humanity's current needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So basically speaking, when we say sustainability, it is our ability to acquire our needs or without sacrificing the ability for future generations. Meaning, when we say sustainability, we were able to achieve what we want without compromising the future generation. So other meaning, it is to achieve when the environment can function indefinitely without going into a decline from the stresses that human society imposes on natural system such as fertile soil, water, and etc. Now, take a look from the word without going into a decline from the stresses that we are imposing on natural system. That is sustainability, or sustainability again applies not only in one sector, it applies to everyone. Whether it is an individual, community, it is regional, national, or global levels. Everybody must cooperate to achieve sustainability. Now, sustainability is based in part on the following ideas. We must think simultaneously about economic, social, and environmental well-being. For the first 3 years of plan implementation, stakeholders have increasingly been participating in transformative actions towards bringing back the benefits that Filipinos enjoy from environment and natural resources while improving resilience to climate and disaster risk. The following actions and reforms in the sector were put in place at demonstrations effect of rehabilitation's efforts, Boracay and Manila Bay.
How did they rehabilitate Boracay? These include recovering the beach areas and cleaning its waters, regaining the wetlands which are the island's kidneys, restoring ecosystems, and clearing and paving the roads that are designated for public transport. Moving forward, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources or DENR, Acting Secretary Jim Osampulna, announced the successful rehabilitation efforts for the famous tourist destinations which is Boracay.
A blessed day to everyone. I am Aisalgi Mahilam and I will be discussing about Sustainable Integrated Area Development or SIAD. It is a development strategy that addresses in an integrated manner the ecological, economic, political, cultural, societal, human, and spiritual challenges and opportunities in a specific area context and uses the three-folding convergence approach, which is government, business, and civil society. To support SIAD, we need to lobby for harmonized and fortified legislation to ensure ecological integrity and clean environment, especially areas that are vulnerable to climate change. Next is to sustain biodiversity and functioning of ecosystem services. It intensifies sustainable management of natural resources through adoption of ridge to reef approach and sustainable integrated area development conservation. Protection and management of natural resources will be strengthened to ensure that ecosystem services are adequate.
I am Rochelle Ibanez Santiago and I am going to discuss the strategy include in forest and watershed, mineral resources, coastal and marine and cross-cutting strategy. Forest and watershed clearly demarcate the high-value conservation areas that need proper management or protection zones from areas for private sector investment or production zone. So forest land boundary delineation and demarcation will be undertaken to clearly mark the extent of forest land that need proper management. This will provide the basis for identifying the areas for private sector investment or production zone and for government and private sector protection and conservation activities or protection zones. reverse the loss of forest cover by continuing to rehabilitate degraded forest lands, including critical watersheds, and strengthening protection of remaining natural forests. Rehabilitation of the remaining unproductive, denuded, and degraded areas will be accelerated and prioritized. In addition, the protection of remaining natural forests as well as the forests established from previous reforestation activities will be ensured. Effectively manage protected areas through ecosystem restoration as well as demarcation and zoning to avoid encroachment into protected areas. So ecosystem restoration will be implemented especially for degraded habitats, for example, mangroves, wetlands, forests, coral reefs, as well as demarcation and zoning of protected areas to avoid encroachment on boundaries of the PA's policy gaps, including institutional and technical capacities on protected areas management will be addressed. Strengthen law enforcement against illegal trade of wildlife species. Efforts to combat illegal trade of wildlife species will be strengthened through more policing activities, including designation of more forest rangers to guard against illegal collection, possession, and trade of wildlife. Regulations on bioprospecting and other economic activities involving the country's biodiversity will also be strictly enforced. Come up with appropriate tenure and management arrangement to establish accountability of communities in the management of forest lands and protected areas while allowing them to enjoy economic returns. This will provide local communities the rights to develop the forest resources and enjoy the economic returns. Strengthened partnership between land-related agencies and local governments in the formulation of groups and zoning of residential areas will be prioritized. This will be supported by a legislation or proclamation for the adoption of the cadastral survey results, enhancement of modern technology, land resource information, as well as the capacity and competence of practitioners and workers in the land sector will be pursued. In addition, delineation and ancestral domains and its waters will be accelerated, including provision of economic and cultural services to IPs or indigenous cultural communities and local communities within the framework of IPs, socio-cultural integrity and ecological balance. Strengthen research and development on forests, watershed, and biodiversity. Research studies to assess the carrying capacity of ecosystem and to determine factors that threaten important native and endemic species, including their habitats, will be undertaken to identify appropriate conservation measures. Surface and groundwater resources nationwide will also be assessed to ensure water supply sustainability. Also, a critical area of research will be the identification of the country's genetic resources and their economic potentials. Strengthen environmental and social safeguards for mineral resources development. Strictly enforce existing laws, rules, and regulations in the mining industry. Compliance of mining industry to existing laws, rules, and regulations will be strictly enforced to safeguard the integrity of the environment and mining affected communities. This will be done by strengthening the environmental impact statement system and guaranteeing a just and equitable distribution of mining benefits. Resource evaluation studies, example, cost-benefit analysis, will be conducted to identify the most beneficial and sustainable use of land in support of national development. Now let's proceed to the coastal and marine. Enforce complete delineation, delimitation, and zoning of municipal waters. Delineation and delimitation of municipal waters will be complete, especially in areas with overlapping waters boundaries, example, adjacent and opposite cities and municipalities. This will ensure that municipal fisher folk of coastal cities and municipalities are given preferential use and exclusive access to the resources. This will also facilitate a more effective apprehension of violators. In addition, foreshore areas will be mapped and zoned into production and protection areas to ensure fisheries sustainability. Strengthen law enforcement and the management of coastal and marine areas. Stricter implementation and enforcement of national and local laws, policies, and plans will be pursued. Strategic policing and patrolling activities against illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing and other extractive activities will be conducted in management areas, including marine protected areas or MPAs, and fish refuge and sanctuaries. Rationalize the identification of marine protected areas and their networks. Coastal and MPAs are important components of integrated coastal management or ICM, an ecosystem approach to fisheries management. They will help ensure the continued supply of seafood, underpin ecotourism, and enhance climate resilience. Networks of marine protected areas, fish refuge and sanctuaries, and managed access areas will be pursued to improve ecological connectivity and management efficiency. Intensify research on coastal and marine habitats and resources. There is a need to enhance data availability and accessibility to monitor the status and productivity of coastal and marine resources, including vulnerability to natural hazards and CC. Improve and regular data collection, scientific assessment, and identification of spawning areas for priority fish species will be conducted.
I am going to discuss about inland, wetland, caves, and urban biodiversity. What is inland? Inland is situated in the interior of a country rather than on the coast. Wetland. A wetland is a place in which the land is covered by water, salt, fresh, or somewhere in between, either seasonally or permanently. It functions as its own distinct ecosystem. You can recognize wetlands from other types of land or bodies of water primarily by the vegetation that has adapted to wet soil. Cave. A cave or caverns is a natural void in the ground, especially a space large enough for a human to enter. Caves often form by the weathering of rock and often extend deep underground. What is urban biodiversity? Urban biodiversity refers to the variety of living organisms, including their genetic variations, as well as the multiplicity of habitats in and around dense human settlements. Urban biodiversity can help improve air quality by sequestering carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and releasing oxygen, reducing the incidence of respiratory problems such as asthma.
Improving environmental quality. Government, private and business, and individual will be enjoined to take collective and concrete actions to achieve a clean and healthy environment. Strategies will focus on eliminating the long-term impact of pollutions on biodiversity, the ecosystem, and public health. First, the strengthened enforcement regulations, coordinations, and monitoring of environmental compliance and management interventions. The enforcement regulations and monitoring of compliance with existing environmental laws and regulations will be intensified to implement the necessary operational mechanisms to address the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, rapid urbanization, and climate change on environmental quality. Air quality management. The air quality compliance monitoring activities of the DENR will be complemented by more aggressive implementations of the vehicle emissions testing program and no contact apprehensions policy of the Department of the Transportation, or what we call DOTR, and Land Transportation's Office.
So now let's proceed to the cross-cutting strategy. Review, codify, and streamline existing environment and natural resources policies, rules, and regulations to improve compliance, address conflicting provisions, and promote transparency and accountability. So sustainable financing mechanism for ENR, CCA, and DRRM efforts will also be determined and operationalized to ensure continuity of activities, but still strongly motivating behavioral change at the national, community, and individual levels regarding ENR. Preservation and management will be the most effective strategy. So now let's proceed to the legislative agenda that ensures ecological integrity, clean, and healthy environment. The National Land Use Bill. It aims to provide an institutional mechanism for integrating existing sector-specific land use laws and institutionalized land use planning as basis for the rationalization, management, and development of the country's land resources.
Philippine Genetic Resources Access and Benefit Sharing Bill. It aims to provide and institutionalize a policy framework on access and benefit sharing from the utilization of genetic resource aligned with the countries.
Integrated Coastal Management or ICM Bill. It aims to adopt ICM as a national strategy to ensure the sustainable development and establish a supporting mechanism for its implementation.
Amendment of the Wildlife Act. It aims to strengthen the protection of the country's wildlife resources by increasing the fees and penalties for violators, define and implement sanitary and phytosanitary measures to address possible entry of zoonotic infectious disease into the country. Example, standards and protocols for crops, livestock, fisheries, and wildlife.
The Forest Limit Bill. It intends to delineate the specific limits of forest lands for conservation, protection, and development of the country's forest resources.
Sustainable Forest Management Bill. It will institutionalize the development of sustainable forest management strategy based on the allocation of forest land uses production and protection zones, enhancement of private sector participation, and forest certification, monitoring, assessment, and reporting system.
Maritime Zones Bill. It intends to define the limits of the different maritime zones over which the country can exercise sovereignty, territorial sea, and sovereign rights exclusive economic zone. This will support the implementation of measures to sustainability manage fisheries and other resources in these maritime zones.
Next, we have Philippine Archipelagic Sea. Lanes Bill. It intends to define the limits of archipelagic sea. Lanes foreign ships will have to confine their navigations within the sea lanes to ensure that vessels will not pass through MPAs and marine habitats are protected from shipping-related activities.
Proper Management of Electronic Waste or E-Waste Bill. It aims to institutionalize mechanism and guideline standards for proper collection, handling, storage, and disposal of electronic wastes.
Department of Disaster Resilience Bill. It aims to provide a clear operational framework to address the fragmented institutional functions and actions among concerned agencies on climate change and disasters by establishing a department that will serve as the primary agency responsible for leading the coordination, implementation, monitoring and reporting on climate change and disaster risk reduction and management.
Philippine Environmental Assessment System to cover the Strategic Environmental Assessment or CBIL. It aims to ensure that possible environmental consequences of policies, plans, and programs are fully accounted for at the earliest stage of decision-making consistent with economic and social considerations. This will also strengthen the use of the environmental impact statement system as a planning and monitoring tool.
Amended of the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, and Substance Hazardous and Nuclear Waste Control Act. This is to provide higher penalties and stringent measures for environmental protection. It also intends to bridge the policy gap between municipal waste management and healthcare waste management by streamlining protocols on the management of hazardous wastes, particularly infectious wastes, at the community and households levels.
These bills will also contain better enforcements against mixed waste collection and biodegradables in landfills, and incentives for home composting, as well as LGU support for at-source segregation and composting.
Green Public Procurement Bill. It aims to strengthen green public procurement by enhancing compliance of procuring entities and integrating green criteria in the procurement guidelines, including binding documents and technical specifications, in the setting clear LGU involvement based on the market readiness.
Extended Producer Responsibility Bill. It aims to enhance product stewardship among producers, manufacturers nationwide who will be made responsible for the disposal and treatment of post-consumer products and help minimize pollution, especially from packaging materials of the food and beverage sector at source.
Safe Pathways Bill. This intends to provide safe and convenient pathways for pedestrians and non-motorized vehicles, example, walkways and bike lanes, and integrate this in the infrastructure development agenda. The bill intends to create a network of pop-up bicycle lanes to connect users to essential destinations, example, medical facilities, designate a network of people-oriented emergency pathways, and mandate the provision of adequate parking spaces for bicycles and other non-motorized vehicles as far as practicable, among others.
Next, we have Maritime Safety, Security, and Prevention of Ship Source Pollution Bill. It intends to provide a maritime code that will implement and enforce international maritime instruments of which the country is a state party. These include the international conventions for the prevention of pollution from ships and its protocols.